Okay, let's get started. This is part 26 of our continuing series on the 8th chapter of Bava Kama. And I think we probably have 2 more classes after this. It's possible it will be 3, but I think it's going to be 2, which will get us finished in plenty of time for me to leave town at the beginning of July. Okay, this evening's class is entirely a continuation of the conversations that we had last week between Rava and Rabbi Bar Mari, in which Rava asked Rabbi Bar Mari for a source, a Torah-related source for either a rabbinic saying, or a popular saying, and then sometimes there's just a source, sometimes there's actually a discussion of the source, sometimes Rava offers an alternative to Rabbi Bar Mari's source, but that's basically the theme almost until the end of the chapter at this point for what's going to be happening. Okay, so let's get started. Amar le Rava le Rabbi Bar Mari. So Rava said to Rabbi Bar Mari, Minaha milti da Amri Inshi. Where does this thing come from that people say? Batar anya azla anyuta. That poverty follows poor people. Sounds like it's a popular saying along the lines of the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Amar le Ashirin mivi'in bikurim beklatot shel zahav v'shel kesef. So he quoted to him, I believe this is a Mishnah. That when bringing the first fruits to the Beit HaMikdash in the summer, the rich would bring them in containers made out of gold and silver. V'aniyim b'salei nitzarim shel arava klufa, and the poor people would bring theirs in baskets that were made of peeled willow branches. I think peeled means that the bark has been removed. And so you already see that the poor are poor, right? They don't have silver and gold. They just have, pieces of wood. And then v'hasalim v'habikurim etunim lekohanim. And the baskets and the first fruits go to the Kohanim. The rich people get their containers back because their containers are silver and gold. The poor people, on the other hand, who presumably could afford to lose a willow basket less than the rich people could afford to lose a silver container, the poor people lose their baskets. They stay with the fruit. Okay. So whenever you have a source like this, you have to kind of wonder if the rabbis saw that what they were doing was perpetuating something that they didn't really want to perpetuate. You have to kind of wonder why they didn't try to fix it and say, well, the silver and gold baskets should stay in the temple also or something. But I never have answers to those things. Okay, so so Rava says back to Rabbi Bar Mari, Amar le, Ad Amar mehatam v'ana amina mehacha. He says, you say it from over there, but I say it from over here. And this is from a passage in either Tazria or Mitzora. I think it's in Tazria, that a Mitzora, a person with tzara'at, tameh yikra, he has to call out that he's tameh as he's walking down the street so that people know to avoid him. Right, so he's already in this terrible situation in which he's first of all, he's afflicted with this disease, and then on top of that, he's got all of these religious restrictions that happen as a result of the disease. And now on top of that, he's also got the social restrictions that are going to be the result of his having to yell at everybody who tries to come close to him that he's tameh and they need to get away from him. And it seems like the Torah is kind of piling on there in a way that's parallel to the poor people getting poorer. Okay, next question. Amar le Rava le Rabbi Bar Mari. So Rava asked Rabbi Bar Mari, Minaha milta da Amur Rabbana. this time he asked, where does this rabbinic saying come from? Hashkem ve'echol b'kayitz mipnei hachama u'v'chorach mipnei hatzina. So apparently the rabbis had a saying that you need to get up early in the morning and eat breakfast because it protects you from the heat in the summer and from the cold in the winter. Not clear whether they want you also to eat breakfast when the weather is pleasant. It might just be they want you to eat breakfast all the time. That's not completely clear to me. In any case, so there we have a rabbinic statement, and we also have a parallel popular saying here. The Amri Inshi Shitin Rahute Rahut Velo Matu Legavre de Mitzafra Kara. So apparently the popular way of saying this, the regular people say that 60 runners run, but they won't catch up to the man who ate bread in the morning. Which that one actually doesn't sound like it has anything to do with any specific weather or danger or handicap of any kind. It just sounds like you're going to be a stronger, healthier person if you eat breakfast in the morning. Okay, so then Rabbi Bar Mari's answer is dichtiv, as it says, lo yiravu v'lo yitzmeu v'lo yikam shrav v'shemesh. So we might have been tempted to read this prophecy from Yeshayahu, if we didn't have this context, as a list of bad things that aren't going to happen to these people. They won't be hungry, and they won't be thirsty, and they won't be afflicted with heat or sun. But Rabbi Bar Mari is reading it instead causally. If they're not hungry or thirsty, then they won't be afflicted by heat or sun. Which my guess would be that he doesn't literally think that Yeshaya thinks that, and he thinks it's just a handy place to hang this popular idea. So Rava said back to Rabbi Bar Mari, well, you say it from there, but I say it from here. And we are now in Shemot Kaf Gimel Kaf Hey, and here we need the whole pasuk. So I'm gonna open my Tanakh. Okay, we are in Parshat Mishpatim, and we are in an exhortation to destroy idolatry once you get into the land of Canaan. And the paragraph ends, "V'avadtem et Hashem Elokechem, uve'irach et lachmecha ve'et meimecha, v'hasiroti machala mikirbecha." You will serve Hashem, your God, and he will bless your food and your water, and I will remove disease from among you. Okay, so but we're gonna sort of dissect that and take it one bit at a time. So the first clause, you should serve Hashem your God. That means you ought to say Shema and you ought to pray. Then God will bless your bread and your water. That's the breakfast you're supposed to eat. Bread with salt and a bottle of water. Okay, so it seems like we're describing what's supposed to be your morning routine, right? Get up, pray, say Shema, eat breakfast, and then mikan ve'ilach, for the rest of the day, v'hasiroti machalami kirbecha, I will keep disease out of your midst. Vitanya, and Rava says, and I can quote you a breita about this too, machala zumara, that this disease that they're talking about, that's an excess of bile. Keeping in mind that in the ancient world and until not that long ago, the early modern period, people thought that human disease was caused by an imbalance of humors in the body, of which bile is one. So we think that the disease referred to here is something caused by having bile. Why is it called sickness because shmonim v'shlosha chalaim yesh bo. It makes you sick in 83 different ways. And machala b'gematria hachi hafu. And machala, the word disease in gematria, is 83. Right? Mem is 40 plus 8 is 48. Plus the lamed, which is 30, is 78. Plus 5 more gets you to 83. So that that's why it's a disease that has 83 symptoms it is given a name whose gematria is 83. V'kulan pat b'melach shacharit v'kiton shel mayim mevatlin, and all of them are gotten rid of by bread and salt and a bottle of water first thing in the morning, right? Which, on the one hand, the gallbladder is part of the digestive system, so it's not like there's no relevance between eating and the action of bile in your body. And on the other hand, I would not take this as medical advice, and I would not worry too much about the medical details here. But one way or the other, there does seem to be a consensus among the rabbis, the lay people, the way that we are choosing here to read the prophets and the way that we're choosing to read Chumash, that eating first thing in the morning is good for you. My mother said the same thing. I imagine lots of other people's mothers did too. It may very well just be true, and that's why everybody agrees on it, or not. Who knows? Okay. Amarle Rava le Rabba bar Mari. Time for our next question. So Rava asked Rabba bar Mari, Minaha milta damar Rabbanan, where does this thing come from that the rabbis say? Chavra karya chamra uchpa legabi chmush. So if your friend calls you a donkey, then a saddle on your back, mush, you should put it there. So put a saddle on your back if your friend calls you a donkey, meaning if somebody says something insulting, you should just act as if it's true instead of arguing about it. That seems to be the idea of the saying. So Amrle, he said back to him, Dichtiv, Vayomer Hagar Shifchat Sarai, Amy Zebat Va'ana Telechi. So let's actually have a moment of context here. We're in Sefer Breshit, and Hagar has married Avraham on Sarai's instructions, and Sarai is unhappy that Hagar is no longer subservient, and so she oppresses her, beats her, or something like that, and Hagar runs away, and she runs into an angel at a well, and the well has a conversation with the angel. And the angel says to her, Hagar Shifchat Sarai, Hagar, the slave of Sarai, Amy Zabat va'ana telechi. Where did you come from and where are you going? And it would seem that, at least in the rabbinic conception of the story, Hagar is not actually enslaved anymore at this point. That at the point when she married Avram, she was freed, and he married her as a full wife. That is the rabbinic reading. It doesn't fit that well with the fact that when Sarai gets upset with Hagar's behavior, she goes to Avram, and Avram says, well, do whatever you want to her. She's your slave. Right? Like, that's a little weird if she's actually a free person at that point. But marriage between slaves and slaveholders is forbidden by the Torah, and the rabbis were not prepared to believe that that's what Abraham is doing here, and so that the sort of the assumption is that if a free man marries a slave, it means that he freed her first. In any case, so the angel just called her slave of Sarai, and asked her where she came from. And so she responds, I am running away from my mistress Sarai. That connects to the issue that the saying that we're trying to derive here, because Hagar seems to be, I guess, agreeing to have this conversation in the set of facts that the angel walked in with. Instead of saying, no, you got it wrong, I'm not enslaved, she says, I'm running away from my mistress, instead of I'm running away from my former mistress, who, by the way, you should please stop saying I'm the slave of. So it seems like we're supporting here this idea of operating on the parameters of the person who said something that's not true at the beginning of the conversation. Okay, Amrle Rava Barmari, Minaha Milta Amri Inchi. So Rava asked Rabba Barmari, where does this popular saying come from? Milta Gina Diit Bich Kadim Amr. And this one is, I think, still relatively current. If there's something bad that is about you, make sure you're the one who says it first. And that's a reasonable piece of advice. You're better off controlling the narrative than letting other people say things about you. And he wants to know where this comes from in the Torah. So Rabbi Barmari says, Amrle dichtiv vayomer eved Avraham Anochi. So now we have skipped forward 7 or 8 chapters in Breshit, and we are in the scene where Avraham's slave is introducing himself to Rivka's family, and he begins with, I'm the slave of Avraham, which apparently the Gemara is, or Rabbi Barmari is assuming that, first of all, it's not necessarily in this guy's best interest to be thought of as a slave, and second of all, that it would have been possible for him to conduct the negotiations without telling them that he was a slave. But he tells them anyway, because sooner or later they're going to find out, and it's better that it come from him. Okay, next question. Amarle Rava Rabba Barmari. Rava said to Rabba Barmari, Minaha Milti Damri Inshi, where does this thing come from? And people say, Shafil va'azil bar avza ve'ene metaifi. So the son of a goose, which I have translated as a gander, walks bent low, but his eyes are looking up, presumably looking for food, right? So there's sort of a combination of humility and an expectation of improvement. And I think the idea of the popular saying is that there's this way of being, probably a good way of being, in which you act humble, you act lowly, but you're ambitious to improve your situation. So now we need to go to Shmuel Aleph, to chapter 25. To the story of Naval and Abigail. Okay, so we've got this rather unpleasant character named Naval, who is rude and ungrateful and unpleasant to David. And David is getting all set to attack him. David soldiers have been protecting Naval's animals and their shepherds. And David, in return, asks for food. Naval turns him away. So David threatens to attack and kill everybody. And Abigail, who's Naval's wife, sneaks out with a bunch of food to negotiate privately with David a better deal for her family, because she knows he's going to take the food anyway, and she'd rather they not all be dead. But also, it would seem that she's a political supporter of his. Right? There may be a division in politics between Abigail and Naval and their their respective taking sides in the fight between Shaul and David. In any case, when Abigail goes to meet David, we're now fairly late in this narrative. She has gone through this long spiel about, among other things, about how he's going to be king. And he wouldn't want to, once he's king, look back on now and think that he, did something that he would regret. And we are in Pasuk Lamed Aleph toward the very end of her speech. Right, this thing shouldn't be a trap for your majesty. To spill innocent blood, and to save my master for him. She gets to the end of this very humble speech about how, really, I'm just thinking about your well-being, and I'm worried it might not be so good for your ascendancy to the throne if you go around murdering people. And then at the end, she throws in, and by the way, once you become king, remember me. So we do, in fact, have this combination of abject humility with a request for help, which in the end she ends up as one of his queens. So we think we can also call it political ambition. She's asking to be brought into the government once he becomes king, like our goose or gander here, who is looking down at the ground, but also looking up for better opportunities. Okay. New question. Amrle Rava l'Rabba bar Mari. So Rava said to Rava bar Mari, Mina hamilti damri. And where does this popular saying come from? Shitin tachli mitaya lekacha dekel chavre shama v'lo'acha. So 60 pains come to the teeth, kacha apparently are teeth, that heard the voice of his friend, the kal chavre shama, and commentators say that what he heard is his friend eating, vilo achal, and he didn't eat. Meaning, if you can hear somebody else eating and you don't eat yourself, then I don't think we're talking about psychological pain here. I think that they're suggesting that can even make you physically ill. To have your body develop an expectation of eating because you're listening to people eating and you don't get food. Amrle, dichtiv v'li ania avdecha v'letzadok hakohenu v'nayahu ben Yehoyada u'lishlomo avdecha lo kara. So we're now fast forwarding from the very beginning of David's career back in Shmuel Aleph, when he's not yet king, to the extreme other end. Right, David is now on his deathbed in chapter 1 of Malachim Aleph, and Natan Hanavi has come to tell the king, well, he and Bathsheba have come together to tell the king that his son Adoniah is setting himself up as king. He's invited people to a party basically for his own coronation, even though David is alive and David has not designated Adoniah to be the next king. And this is the pasuk that we've quoted is part of this speech, in which he says, and all these people are, well, let's go back one pasuk before this speech. Ki yarad hayom vayizbach shor umariv etzon larov. Right, he went down today and he killed all these animals. Vayikra l'chol b'nei hamelech u'l'sarei hatzava u'le'Aviatar hakohen, and he called all of the princes and all of the army officers and to Eviatar the Kohen. V'hinam ochlim v'shotim lefanav, and they're all eating and drinking in front of him. Vayomru yechi hamelech Adoniyahu, and they're all saying, "Long live King Adoniyahu." And it really, in the event that David does not want Adoniyahu to be king, this is treason. This is a very serious political matter, and Rabbi Bar Mari is going to take it to be about the food, but I think even he knows that that's a triviality on the side here, and it's about the politics. Vili ani avdecha, and as for me, ulet Tzadok Kohen and Tzadok the Kohen, V'nayahu ben Yehoyada and Benayahu ben Yehoyada and Shlomo avdecha and Shlomo your servant, lo kara, were the only 4 important people in the palace who weren't invited. And the fact that we weren't invited on a political level, what that means is he's serious about this making himself king instead of Shlomo thing, right? If he weren't trying to slip something past Shlomo, he would have invited Shlomo and his cronies too. The fact that he left those people out is part of the fact that he's trying to schism the palace staff. On the other hand, the way Rabbi Bar Mari is taking it is that this is at least in part a complaint that all these other people had food to eat and we didn't get any food, which I think is not the main focus of the pasuk, but it might be a minor side focus. Okay. So Rabbi responds, Amar le atamart mehatam ana amina mehacha. He says, you said it from Malachim Aleph, but I have a better source. Vayivieha Yitzchak ha'oel asara imo, vayikach et Rivka, vatihi lo isha v'yaveha, vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. So this is toward the end of Parshat Chayei toward the end of Parshat Chayei Sarah. Yitzchak and Rivka get married. Yitzchak brings her into his mother's tent, and he marries Rivka, and Rivka becomes his wife, and he loves her, and then Yitzchak becomes comforted after the death of his mother. Okay. Uchtiv Batre, and the next pasuk after that is Vayosef Avraham Vayikach Isha Ushma Keturah. That Avraham gets remarried. He marries again, and his new wife's name is Keturah. So I think Rava is saying that this idea can be expanded beyond food. It's not just about somebody else is eating and you don't get any food. That is very uncomfortable or potentially even physically damaging. That it is true of other human needs as well. And when you realize that other people are happily married and you're not happily married because your wife's dead, then you say, well, I want to be happy again, and you get married. And so it's Yitzchak's marriage that, according to Rava here, inspires Avraham to remarry. In the same way as in the popular saying, hearing somebody else eat might inspire you to eat breakfast or lunch or whatever. Okay. Next question. Amar le Rava le Rabba Bar Mari. So Rava said to Rabba Bar Mari, Minaha milta d'amri yanchi. Where does this thing come from? The people say, Chamra lemare tivuta l'shakye. So the wine belongs to its owner, but the gratitude goes to the pourer of the wine. Meaning, I guess, in its most basic form, that if I have a party and I have waiters serving beverages, then everybody's going to thank the waiter for the wine instead of thanking me for it. Which, I don't know, it might be maybe culturally dependent. I feel like in our culture, we thank both the waiter and the host, but okay. In any case, so he says to him, Amar le dichtiv v'samachta et yadcha alav l'man yishmeun v'yirun kol adat b'nei Yisrael. So this is God talking to Moshe, and he tells him what he needs to do in order for the children of Israel to trust Yehoshua as their new leader. He says, put your hands on him so that they will listen and they will see. All the congregation of Israel will listen and see. Right, that part, the pasuk in Bamidbar, just seems to be describing a public spectacle in which Moshe makes it clear who his successor is. Okay, Uchtiv, and it is also written, and this is much later, but about the same scene. V'Yoshua bin Nun malei ruach chochma ki samach Moshe et yadav alav vayishmeu elav kol bnei Yisrael. And Yehoshua bin Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom because Moshe put his hands on him. And all of the children of Israel listened to him. So I think that Rabbi Barmari's point here is that it doesn't say that Yehoshua was full of the spirit of wisdom because God gave him the spirit of wisdom. It says Yehoshua was full of the spirit of wisdom because Moshe put his hands on him, which seems that's like the waiter pouring wine. It's not Moshe's wisdom to give. And he's not really the one giving it. He's just following God's instructions and handing out God's goodies. But the people, what they see is Moshe passing on his legacy to Yehoshua, and that is the way the Torah describes it. Okay. Next, Amrle Rava Barmari. Rava asked Rabbi Barmari, Minaha Milta de Amri Inshi, where does this popular saying come from? Haba bekanfe glale mivla. A hungry dog will even swallow dung. I've never actually had a dog, but my impression is that there are some dogs that will eat pretty much anything, even if they're not hungry. I think the relevance of these sayings, even when they're talking about animals, is usually actually about people. And what it means is that hungry people, starving people, will eat things that are not food. Desperation drives you to do things that are not necessarily in your best interest. Dichtiv. So that now Rabbi Barmari responds, Nefesh sav'a tavus nofet, a person or a soul that is sated, that's full of food, will reject even honey, or I guess the word could mean honey or honeycomb, either one. V'nefesh reiva kol mar matok, and for the soul that's starving, all bitter things taste sweet. It seems basically to be the same idea, just about people instead of dogs, and a little bit less crude. I'm really Rabbi Barmari. So Rabbi asked Rabbi Barmari again, Minaha Milta Damri Inshi, where does this thing come from? The people say, Mitayo Azil Dikla Bisha Gabe Kina Desarchi. The Dikla Bisha, the bad date palm, strolls or walks among barren trees. Now this one is clearly actually about people, not about trees. You might have noticed trees don't usually stroll anywhere. So I think it's clear that the saying is meant to mean that people who are not necessarily of the highest character tend to seek out other people of a criminal bent to hang out with. Okay, so he responds to him. Rabbi Barmari says, Davar zeh katuv b'Torah, shanui b'nevi'im, u'mishulash b'ktuvim, u'tinan b'matnitin v'tanina b'braita. He says, this thing is everywhere. It's written in the Torah, and it's repeated in the prophets, and it's repeated again in the writings, although we'll have to deal with exactly what that is when we get there in a minute. And it is taught in the Mishnah, and it's also taught in the Braita. Okay, Katuv b'Torah. So now we're going to quote all 5 of those sources. It's written in the Torah, Dichtiv vayelech Esav el Yishmael. It's written, we're now in Bereshit 28:9. At the end of, I'm sort of tying up loose ends of the end of Yishmael's life. I'm sorry, wrong. This is after Yaakov is sent away to marry a daughter from the family. Because Rivka says publicly she doesn't like Esav's wives, Esav makes this sort of desperate attempt to get back his parents' favor, and he goes to his uncle Yishmael and marries his cousin Machlat, which does not seem to improve anything. It doesn't say anything about what his parents thought about that wife choice at all. There's something very deeply tragic about Esav's attempts to please his parents and his inability to ever quite get it right. But in any case, the Esav, who is the wrong son, goes off to find a wife with the other wrong son, Yishmael. So we've got a sort of a negative birds of a feather flock together kind of phenomenon happening here. And then Shanui b'Nevi'im dichtiv, it's repeated in the prophets, as it says, and this is at the beginning of the 11th chapter of Shoftim, toward the beginning, although not quite at the beginning, of the story of Yiftach. Right, this is Yiftach, the same guy who sort of swears to sacrifice his daughter and then either does or doesn't, depending on how you read the end of the story. But this is back at the beginning when he's not yet even been appointed the military leader of his local place, is run out of town by the legitimate sons of his father, of whom he is an illegitimate son. And his brothers run him out of town, and he goes off to hide someplace, and he's joined by a collection of losers, right? And all of the empty men collected themselves to Yiftach, and they stayed with him. So it seems like Yiftach is at this moment being run out of town as a low quality person, and all of the other people who are also social outcasts are also gathering to collect him. Yiftach is not consistently seen in the Gemara as a bad person, and I think this reference we're going to have to put in the category of people who think he's not a very good person, because otherwise bad people collecting to him wouldn't be an example of how bad people go hang out with other bad people. It would be a sad example of how sometimes good people get stuck with bad people. So I think Rabbi Bar Mari has to be on the side of saying that Yiftach is not a very good guy. Okay, and it is repeated again in the Ketuvim. Ketuvim normally refers to the third section of the Tanakh. In fact, Tanakh stands for Torah, that's the Taf, Nevi'im, that's the Nun, Uktuvim, and the Chaf is Ketuvim, the writings. The pasuk we have here is not really a pasuk. It is from a book that we did not include in Tanakh. It is mysterious how a certain number of verses from Ben Sira make it into the Gemara, quoted as if they were biblical. This verse is not biblical. It is from a book that we decided to exclude from the Bible. But apparently whoever went through the Gemara searching for these references and to remove them after we decided we didn't like this book, missed some of them. In any case, so the pasuk in Ben Sira is Kol of lemino yishkon uvnei adam lidomelo. So birds go live next to other birds that are of the same kind, and people with those that are like them. And that one actually really just says the same thing as the original statement, except that it extends it not to animals and humans, not just trees, but otherwise it's really just the same thing. Okay, and it is repeated in a Mishnah. Kol ha'mechubar l'tamei, tamei, kol ha'mechubar l'tahor, tahor. So we have this idea in Masechet Kelim. Masechet Kelim is a very long Masechet. It's 30 chapters long, and it is in effect a list of every man-made object in Mishnaic society and all of its pieces, and how and when they can become tamei, and how and when you can make them tahor again. It is very difficult to read as a result, because we don't actually have any of the objects they're talking about. I shouldn't say that. Many of the objects they're talking about, we don't have them, at least not in the kind of detail and specificity that we would need in order to understand what all the parts are. In this particular case, though, it's talking about hooks that can be attached to different kinds of objects. And it states that anything that's a hook that's attached to a an object that is capable of becoming tameh. By the way, the word tameh in Masechet Kelim most of the time means capable of becoming a tameh, not actually tameh. Anything that's attached to something that can become tameh, the hook itself is also capable of becoming tameh. And if you have a hook which is attached to an object that's not capable of becoming tameh, which, by the way, is what the word tahor most of the time means in Masechet Kelim, then that hook is also not capable of becoming tameh. So this, we've now moved out of the realm of living things completely. All right, we're talking about different kinds of furniture and attaching hooks to them and saying that the hook is going to have the same metaphysical qualities as the piece of furniture you screwed it into. But the idea nonetheless is the same, that we think that alike things are together, or at least that putting things together makes them alike. Okay, and it is repeated in a Braita. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Lo lechinam halach zarzir etzel orev ela mipnei shehu mino. Rabbi Eliezer seems to have observed a starling following a raven. I have to tell you that I sort of know what a raven is, and I have no idea what a starling is, except that it's a bird. But it would seem that Rabbi Eliezer observed a starling following a raven, and he said, aha, it's not a coincidence that the starling is following the raven. Starlings follow ravens because they're similar. Whether he means biologically similar or behaviorally similar, or he just doesn't like either one and thinks they're both yucky, I really don't know. Does anybody here know what a starling looks like? Are they black? Yeah, okay. Fine. So maybe they just look similar. I don't know. But it's going to be on our same theme, that things that similar things are attracted to each other. Or in the case of the Mishnah and Masechet Kelim, that things become alike because you attach them to each other, which may or may not be exactly the same idea. Okay, that is it. I believe next week we will finally come to the end of the conversation between Rabbi Bar Mari and Rava. Although if I've mismeasured how long it keeps going on, I guess it might go into the following Monday. But as I said, I think we have 2 classes left. If that's not so, I will let you guys know. But that is what I have for this evening. Are there questions?
About Abigail.
Mm-hmm.
I had thought that maybe I'm getting names confused, but that David's wife Abigail was the daughter of Shaul.
No, that's Michal.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay,
that's okay.
Sorry.
David has 18 legitimate wives and hundreds of at least according to the Gemara, of other not quite so legitimate wives. So it's not hard to get them confused. But yeah, Abigail she's married to Naval at the time when they meet. Ooh, thanks for this picture of the starling. Yes, in fact, it does look kind of like a small raven. Huh, look at that. Okay. So Abigail is married to Naval at the time when they meet, but then they but very soon after they meet, Naval dies suddenly of a heart attack before David has a chance to murder him. And then somewhat later they get married. There doesn't seem to be anything illegitimate about their marriage, unlike certain other things that David might engage in. This one seems just coincidentally her terrible husband dies at about the same time she meets him.
And Deborah, the only reason why all these seemingly disparate or non-connected items are coming together is because they involve the same people.
They involve the same people, and they seem to involve the same kind of conversation. And it's always asking for a source for a popular saying or a rabbinic saying, and a disproportionate number of them seem to be about politics and succession. So if I knew more about this, I might say that, somebody ought to write a PhD on the subtext in this conversation. But I barely know enough to even have that idea, much less write a PhD thesis on it.
Uh-huh.
So there may in fact be a theme here, but at least on the surface, the reason why they're combined is just because they're all conversations between the same two people.
Right. Otherwise, it seems very random.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Okay. So does this time work for people? Should we do this again next week? I mean, I guess
Sure.
I'm preaching to the choir here because you're the ones who are here at this time, but whatever.
If it works for John and the men who go to Mincha Mariv, then it's fine with me.
Works for me.
Okay. Then I will see you at 8:45 next Monday night. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.